Professor Holden, welcome. It's a huge honor to have you with us today, joining us from Jackson, Mississippi. You honor us with your presence, even if it is virtual. We would love it if you were here in person. But Dr. Holden, you know that USEA is putting on this wonderful annual meeting, and we are going to have you as one of our speakers. So it is a key speaker to give us the wisdom that you have shared via your major publications, your books, your presentations over the years. So Dr. Holden, I'm going to jump right in here and ask you some questions about how you got into energy. How did you become an energy regulator? First up in the Wisconsin Commission and subsequently at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
Sheila, it is a great honor for me to be invited to do this. I have been around a while, and when you've been around a while, it is a particular honor to have anybody believe that you are not ready for burial yet.
Now, Matthew, this is serious.
Of course, this is serious. I'm always serious, but I'm very serious. I'm indebted to be asked, and I suppose I would like to do what I can to be helpful. Focus me on the various questions you've posed for me. Focus me on what would be most helpful in the work that you all are trying to do. And under our present circumstances, and allow me from time to time to go forward a little bit and to go backward a little bit. So you get me started in that way.
All right. Matthew, how did you become an energy regulator? First at the state commission level, and second after that, be pulled by the President Carter to come to Washington and be on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission?
Sheila, that you know me well enough to know that even though it may cost you some audience, I can almost never ask a question without having a story or an anecdote go with it. And the anecdote here is that once when I was still in Washington, still on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, one very able person named Lynn Church was at dinner with some of the others, and she said in a very nice fashion, Matthew, how did you get to Washington? Everybody always wants to know that for anybody. And I gave a standard Holden answer. It wasn't standard until I gave it because I hadn't given it before. I said, by the Interstate Defense Highway Commission, by the Interstate and Defense Highway System. And she looked at me, she says, oh, a smart ass, huh? That was 1970 something. And oh, I had the good luck more than anything else when I was young as teaching in political science to like to get into practical things at the same time. So one way or the other, I got into this thing and that thing and the other thing. And I ended up, interestingly, as a Nixon appointee on something called the President's Air Quality Advisory Board. How that happened, I don't know. I've investigated some, but I was, all I know is what I really know, in contrast to what somebody told me, is that I was going down the stairway one day in my office building, and my young secretary I did have enough negotiating power to have a secretary of my own. Most professors don't have secretaries of their own. You have the departmental secretary. And this young lady came running out and says, Mr. Holden, the White House is on the phone. And I didn't then know the Griffin Bell answer. The White House is a building. Tell me who's on the telephone. I didn't know that then. I simply went back and took the call. And a young lady asked me a couple of questions that didn't require me to pledge anything. Didn't know, I couldn't know why on earth the White House was calling somebody who was a self-evident, by track record, Democrat. I later figured out kind of why that made political sense to them. But you know, the president is considering appointing you to the president's Air Quality Advisory Board. If he does that, will you accept? And I told her yes. And so that was that. And so we had a variety of meetings 2 or 3 times a year. You know how these presidential boards of that type work. And so I began to learn things that I did not otherwise know. They weren't secrets, it was just information provided that I didn't know to go to the library to look up. So that one thing leads to another, and it got me into energy-related stuff. And there came a time when somebody else mentioned my name to Senator Henry M. Jackson of Washington, commonly called Scoop, who was at that time the most important senator on energy subjects. And one thing led to another, and some other phone calls were made, and I got this appointment to the FERC. That started it.
Amazing, amazing, Matthew. Well, while you were at the FERC, what was the most consequential decision that you took part in or may have written the majority on?
The most consequential decision I was involved in was one where I voted no and meant to write an opinion. And that was on the implementation of a set of rules. Known, Sheila, many people amongst your followers will not remember this, but there was a rule making. Maybe people don't even know what an RM is. Maybe RMs don't exist anymore, but RM stood for rulemaking. And I believe, didn't look this up, should have, before talking to you, RM79-22, I believe. That was the first of several rulemakings putting into effect the Natural Gas Policy Act. And the long and the short of the Natural Gas Policy Act was to reduce substantially regulation of prices to end-use customers of natural gas in interstate commerce. I say that very carefully because I'm not sure how much the laws have changed, but interstate, in contrast to intrastate, made all the difference in the world in the part of the country that mostly uses natural gas. That was the end of a long, tumultuous political process.
Sure was.
Which I will claim, though I have no proof, I will claim that I was the first person to call the 30 Years' War.
Yes.
Because basically from 1948 to 1978, there were struggles about the regulation of natural gas and interstate commerce, in which people that I knew and some that I think you worked for fought very hard to keep in the other fashion.
Yes.
And finally, a compromise was reached. And like most compromises, it was a very complicated compromise.
Yes, I remember that part in the enforcement arena. Yes, very complicated, but fascinating and
Well,
fascinating.
I never knew the enforcement arena as well as you did.
Yes, it was certainly an interesting experience. So, Matthew, what do you see as the most significant energy issue confronting us today?
I thought about that was in your questions that I thought about in preparing for this, and I thought about, and that's a harder one to answer. Uh, the reason it's so much harder is that you have to think about what will happen with the biggest existing source of petroleum other than the United States now, and that's Saudi Arabia. And you will have to, unless my numbers are way out of date, if my numbers are out of date, somebody they I'll say, okay, all right, don't blame it on old folks, just go look it up and you'll have it straight. I think it's that's right. And don't say something about the Chinese, only because any country that is determined to grow industrially is going to require some fuel. And petroleum is the most likely fuel. Now, I'm saying that to say that I also know there is coal, but I'm going all the way around on this in order to say reducing the output from industrial production and the wastes that naturally come from producing anything are at the same time the core of the adverse effect in the environment. And you can't grow two things adversely at the same time and also reduce the problems that go with that. So people talk, and you can talk all you please about climate change, but that's a long, long, long road to hoe. And so I could have said that in one sentence, and it would have been just as easy to say it in one sentence. But I'm not sure that everybody would have understood what I meant by saying that, and it certainly would not make those people who speak of climate change would have been as happy. They want to hear that it's all going to be disciplined, consistent, and easy. And that's just not so.
That's some very fulsome observations on the realities of achieving very desired goals, but getting there is it's a long, hard trip.
Everything is a long, hard trip. If I may, Sheila, you remember what seemed complicated then in 1979, 80, etc., in implementing the Natural Gas Policy Act of 1978. That was hard.
Yes, indeed.
And people who have to think about decisions and their consequences didn't think anything at all about uh, the environmental questions we now talk about. I remember that.
Yeah.
I have a picture on the wall that I'm happy to have. I don't throw away my old pictures, but I have a picture of a bunch of us at the White House after the passage of some new legislation, because it was legislation intended to facilitate coal consumption.
Yes. Well, we've been through the shortage.
Right.
We've been through the shortage, and I think it set in motion a lot of things which would be verboten now.
A lot of things that would be verboten now, and that people who think that they're on the right side of things would, for the most part, then have thought a good thing to do.
What do you think is the most significant um, international issue? Do you think it's the Chinese development and competition that is going to affect our energy policy and environmental policy? Would you say that's the key one? Or is it just the needs of the world to have energy, basic energy, and improve what they do have?
Sorry, I don't know. I've thought about that a lot, but I know less about the relevant facts than I should in order to have a really intelligent answer to that question. There are several pieces. I don't know, for example, what to make of a country that we are not talking about much now, and a country that is in American literature not all that well thought of either. But well thought of doesn't make much difference. The question is, what's the advantage in nature? And that's Saudi Arabia. The Saudis didn't have particularly want to be the oil leader of the world. But other investors, and some with some power, did want access to it.
Yes.
When you and I were at the FERC, for example, people didn't customarily comprehend that there was a time in the 20th century when the United States was first in producing in the world and was an excess producer. And at the same time, the Russians were our immediate competitors. Of course, the Russians hadn't had any revolution, and it's a different kind of oil and a different climate and so on. And then the Saudis were brought into it, whether by American interests or other, I don't know. But you're going to have, at some point in this program, you're going to have, I assume, Dan Yergin.
Oh yes, he's coming. He'll be speaking. He's the last speaker of the day.
Okay, and who at least who knew everything there was to know on the subject of oil. I'm not sure whether he knew everything there was to know on the other related energy subjects. So I'm not sure where we should think about the international future of energy, or the or not.
Yeah.
One thing that is important, at least in my thinking, and I don't know how much of your constituency at U.S. Energy Association, is U.S. or US and overseas. I do know that I very quickly learned that Americans thinking about energy are very narrow in their thinking. Americans do not keep in mind that the international complication of the energy market was always there.
Yes.
The question is where the biggest buyers and sellers were, and where and whose profit margin was best. You were thinking about.
Yeah.
And I doubt, though I may be mistaken, that young people in Texas who have always been Texans, who are not migrants, know immediately what the term spindle top means.
Yeah.
And all right, and how that made how that made Texas, in some ways, if I say sitting in Jackson, Mississippi, the Chicago of Mississippi.
Interesting.
All right, Texas is where you go if you want to make some money and you don't want to live in cold weather, and you're from Mississippi.
Yep. Very interesting, Matthew.
All right, that's where Jefferson Davis's grandson, I guess, not grandson, Jefferson didn't have any sons who lived. Jefferson Davis's sister's grandson was George Bush's money manager when George H.W. Bush, when George H.W. Bush was president.
Right. Well, Matthew, so what do you recommend to young people of color who want to get into the energy and environmental issues, education choices? How do they get in if they're interested in energy? Where would they go? How would they start?
Oh, don't ask me all those questions, Sheila. They're too complicated, and at the same time too many. Number one, no matter how incompetent you may feel at it, even if you're as incompetent as I myself would be, learn chemistry. Learn chemistry. Learn physics. You don't have to be good at it. You have to be good at it. Learn it well enough that you know what people are talking about. Because in energy, that is where the stuff that people have to do gets translated from wish into action.
Well said, Matthew.
And so if you're sitting around a meeting and you want to know what people are talking about, then you have to know enough of that.
Yes, I agree. I think the STEM, this science, technology, engineering, it's what's going to put them where they need to go.
All right. Now, there are lots of other things. You said young people of color.
Yes.
I hesitated a little bit at that because I don't really think that that is what does young people of color the most good. The reason is that it builds into young people of color, if you worry about that too much anxiety about what they can't do. Mm-hmm. Anxiety about what you can't do is a whole lot more troublesome than anxiety about how to overcome what your deficiency with the moment is, so as to be with or ahead of the crowd.
Yes.
And ahead of the crowd is usually better than merely with the crowd.
Right.
So, someone's going to jump up, hit me on the head for saying that way, but you have to live with what you think.
I know. Well, thank you, Matthew, for this incredible gift of your time and insight. And we are almost certain to ask you back to do more. But so thank you so much, and we will see you soon.
Oh, well, I appreciate that so much. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.